Hello friends, this is Worm, according to your sophomore yearbook, and today I wanted to talk about cheap weapons in the Crucible, and that's a gross topic to talk about, right? But before we get started talking about that, there are a lot of you who are not subscribed to the channel, and there's not really a good reason why, so go down there, hit that sub button, turn on the bell notifications so you get those notifications, and yeah, let's talk about cheap weapons in Destiny 2. Now, this conversation, I guess, stemmed from a video I was watching yesterday. It was Frostbolt. And within like 30 seconds of the video, he was already talking, or I should say complaining about fusion rifles and calling them cheap and all this stuff. Now, this is not the first time that he's been known to do this. I don't watch a whole lot of his content because it is him just complaining about what everybody else is using, basically. But I figured we could talk about cheap weapons because I have a totally different view on what is cheap, right? And what is, I guess, expensive? Legitimate? I don't really know what the word would be to use for this, but I wanted to talk about this, kind of dive into it, and of course, hear y'all's opinions on cheap weapons, cheap playstyles, and stuff like that. So I'll come right out and say my opinion. There's no such thing as a cheap weapon. Or everything in Destiny 2 is a cheap weapon, right? There's no one end of the scale or another, right? Like either everything is cheap and you really shouldn't be playing this game because everything is cheap, or there's nothing in Destiny 2 that is cheap, that is, unskilled, that is, mindless, nothing like that. And I lean towards the end of the scale where there's no such thing as a cheap option, right? And obviously we can look at it, like in a vacuum here. There's nothing cheap because everything is available to be used. Like if Bungie thought something was cheap and they're the ones who have the final say, they would change it or disable it in the Crucible. But Bungie doesn't do that, right? They let us use whatever we want, right? And that's in a vacuum. But obviously there are certain weapons and certain weapon archetypes that people just hate going against, right? Like I'm not gonna lie, I have those. Whenever I see somebody using hand cannons in a lobby, like I don't know why, it's like, oh, hand cannon users. Like this is about to be a fun game, but they get to me because hand cannon users are scared. They like to hide behind corners and peek out and stuff like that. Blah blah blah. But it's not a cheap play style. It's a perfectly legitimate play style, right? Just like shotgun rushing is perfectly legitimate. Fusion rifles, perfectly legit. Sniping, hand cannons, auto rifles, submachine guns, because those are hot right now. All of these are legit and not cheap options to use in the Crucible. And I think the reason why players like to call things cheap has nothing to do with weapons and their usage or anything like that. It is all up here. Right? The players who complain and who whine and vent and blah, 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 and call weapons cheap or weapon archetypes cheap, it's coming from up here because their ego is here and their skill probably about right down here. Right? Now, I'll be the first to say I'm not the best in the Crucible. Right? I am by no means a god of the Crucible. Like I have good games, I have bad games. Of course, I try to show y'all good games because nobody wants to watch me die over and over and over and over and over again. But I have bad games. Everybody has bad games. I have games where like I'll have a 0.6 KD. It happens, I don't complain about what the enemy is using though. Like I feel like that's not really something that what the enemy is using does not determine my skill in a game. Right? What determines my outcome of the game is, am I able to improvise, adapt, and overcome? Sorry, I had to do it. Am I able to adapt to the enemy's play style? Do I have the willpower to switch my loadouts to something that will counter however the enemy's playing? Or do I just want to be stuck in my ways? And I was thinking about starting a series on, Crucible tips and stuff like that. And here you go. Here's your first tip, right? If you want to get better in the Crucible, learn to counter what your enemies are using. And everybody gets stuck in this mindset of, oh, I have my loadout, I'm going to stick to it because I know it's good, right? That's great. I mean, it's great to have a loadout that you're going to be skilled with. But if you don't have multiple of those loadouts, when you encounter a player who is the epitome of your arch nemesis, who's using a loadout that completely counters yours, whose fault is it if you die a lot. Like it's literally no one but your own, right? And sorry, we're getting off on a tangent. We're talking about loadouts and stuff here. But when it comes to weapons, you know, if I'm in a game and somebody's running around with a fusion rifle and I'm constantly dying to that fusion rifle, is it because they're using a cheap weapon, or is it because I'm making a mistake? Right? Because everybody likes to put the blame off on other people. Okay, nobody takes blame for themselves. And I think this is what separates players who are good from players who are truly great and willing to learn and have fun, right? Because good players are players who are good at the game, right? They're good at the game, but they have these egos that are really cringy. Like this is going to be a throwback for some of y'all, right? For others, you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. But Destiny 1, way back in the day. Do y'all remember She's My Nerd? Okay. If you don't, or if you don't know who that is, if you don't remember, She's My Nerd was basically, for a short time when Destiny 1 first launched, the best PvP player. Like, he was at the top of the charts. He was, you know, literally the best PvP player, you know, and people, he got a bunch of followers, and by a bunch, I mean, he had like 2,000 or 3,000 at his peak. But considering that not that many people played Destiny, that was a lot. But if you go back and you watch his videos, and people even made montages of his cringiness, right? He would die and he would completely 100% blame it on the enemy, blame it on his team, blame on anything but himself. There was one time he was killed by Icebreaker. Clean headshot, you could see it in the feed, you could see it was Icebreaker, and he had the audacity to say, "Oh, final rounded." Okay, and like, I know that there's a lot of y'all who won't understand that, but the ones who do, like, you might know the clip that I'm talking about, right? That right there is the ego inflation that goes beyond, like, really what what any normal person would be, right? Like, any normal person would get killed. Like, yeah, you can be frustrated by getting killed. Like, I'm not saying that, you know, you should never be frustrated by getting killed, okay? What I'm saying, though, is analyze the situation, okay? If somebody if somebody kills you, instead of immediately blaming that person, like, oh, they're using scrub weapon, or my team is trash, look at what you could have done differently to avoid that, right? And like, when I used to stream, because I don't stream very much anymore because I got my kid now, but when I used to stream, I would call out in games, I'd say, I shouldn't have done that. That death right there, like, I know that whatever it was I did, if I shouldn't have walked through that doorway, I shouldn't have challenged that fight, whatever, I admit it out loud, right? And that's a step that you can take. I still do that. I admit it literally out loud. I'm sitting here playing for nobody, right? Nobody's listening. And I'll admit it out loud. And it's because I don't want my ego to inflate to the level of some of these players that say that fusion rifles are cheap, you know, or shotguns are cheap, or, you know, if you're using something that I'm not using, it's cheap. Or if you're using something that I am using, it's cheap. Or like, right? Like, that's toxic. That's obnoxious. That is not something that a lot of people like to listen to and deal with, right? And, you know, that's kind of, I mean, I don't know what else there is to say about it. I really don't. There's no such thing as a cheap weapon in Destiny 2. There are cheap, nope, there's nothing cheap. There's no argument about it. There's nothing cheap. Even 2 weekends ago, we had the whole weapon glitch where weapons were crazy powerful in the Crucible, right? And everybody's like, oh, like, I hate trials this week. It sucks. It's blah, 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 this, that, and the other, because everybody's using all these cheap glitch guns. Guess what? Every single person had access to that glitch. If you didn't use it because of your own, you know, your pride, oh, my pride says that, you know, I'm not going to use glitched weapons because I'm better than that. That's on you. Okay? That is on you. And that, I don't think that's an ego thing. I think that's a pride thing, right? But that's on you. There's no such thing as a cheap weapon. If a weapon is broken or busted in Destiny 2, guess what? I guarantee you potentially have access to it. I guess you could make an argument for like the one situation, like the one situation that could happen. I don't think it ever has happened, but let's say there was a weapon that had a specific perk combination that absolutely broke the game, right? The perks, for whatever reason, independently were fine, but once you got this roll on whatever weapon that had these two perks, it literally broke the gun, made it kill in one shot, then maybe you could make an argument that it's cheap because, again, getting that weapon will be tied to RNG. But that has never happened to my awareness in Destiny or Destiny 2, right? There's never been a weapon that existed that, you know, was strictly RNG based, you know, based on its perk, that was actually broken, right? Hold on, except for D1 days and Vex Mythic class, but that was, I mean, that was a long time ago. These videos are about Destiny 2, not Destiny 1. At any rate, Destiny 2 has never had a situation like that. Like, even guns that are tied to RNG, such as raid weapons, they are not the, like, you know, say all be all of Crucible metas, right? And I know somebody's going to make an argument for conditional finality. Oh, well, conditional finality is insane right now. Like, I see everybody using it. You see everybody using conditional finality because it's good, it handles fast, and it hits hard. But if you take conditional finality and you put it up against Fellwinter's Lie, for example, Fellwinter's Lie is going to win every single time, right? Like there are legendary shotguns that are just as good as conditional finality. Conditional finality just has a little bit more handling than these other ones, but the range is the trade-off. Like, you don't have as much range, right? And that's that would be like, that's not even an exception. Like, there's no raid weapons currently in the PvP meta that are absolutely insanely broken or nutty, right? And I don't think there has been any raid weapons that have been in the PvP meta that are just cracked. You know, even Vex Mythic class, before it got its recent nerf, when it was firing at 390 rounds per minute, like, it was good, but it was not meta by any means, right? Like, I did not see it. I saw it once in a blue moon, and Bungie, for whatever reason, decided to nerf it. I have feelings about that, but for a different time, right? Yeah, anyways, there's no such thing as cheap weapons, okay? If you think a weapon is cheap, or you think that a playstyle is cheap, ask yourself this. Ask yourself, what did you do that put you in a situation to lose against that weapon that you could have done differently, right? And I know this is well, like, you could say that about anything, and yes, you can. Why? Because every single play style has a counter, right? If somebody is playing and you literally, I can't think of a way I could counter them, that simply means that they are better than you, okay? And that's okay. It is okay to admit there are players that are better than you, right? You know, if you took so-and-so versus me in a 1v1, insert whatever top tier PvP player, I would probably lose, because there are players that are better than me. If you took, you know, a random sample of players that I would encounter in Trials of Osiris and put us in a 1v1, I would probably lose about 60 or about 40, I don't know, 40, 50, 60%. I don't know how many I'd lose, okay? I'm not the best. I have a lot of confidence in my 1v1s, right? I do, but I would by no means say I'm the best, because I have games where I have like a 0.6 KD with like 8 kills. That's nothing. You know, I also have games where I'll get 35 kills with a 7 KD, right? Like, it depends on everything that's going on. But, you know, like I said, if I do bad, it's on me. It's not on other people. It's not on people having cheap loadouts and stuff. It's on me, right? If you do poorly in a game, if you die to somebody, it's because you didn't read the situation correctly, right? Maybe outside the first kill of the game. Like, you know, if you're going into a trials match and you're killed within, 8 seconds of the round starting by a shotgun, like, okay, I didn't see that coming. Guess what? For the next round, you now know it's coming, right? And you need to play around it. That's all I got to say about that. Of course, I want to hear your thoughts in the comments, because I know there's some of y'all that will disagree and say that, yes, this weapon is cheap, wherever. No, this is cheap for sure. I want to hear it, because I like to wrestle some jimmies sometime. At any rate, yeah, of course, like the video if you enjoyed it, or if you agree with what I said, or if you disagree with what I said, feel free to like it anyways. Subscribe for more daily Destiny content and conversations and debates such as this one. And yeah, that's it for me. Do me a favor, watch the videos you see on the end screen, because for whatever reason, YouTube thinks you will like them. And ladies and gentlemen, I will see y'all tomorrow. Bye for now, guys.